Die Präsidentin!
Einen wunderschönen guten Morgen.
Good morning, everybody. Please take your seats. I'm extremely pleased to see everybody here for this debate. We're going to continue with the session that is now resumed. The first item on our agenda this morning are Council and Commission statements on the preparation of the EU-Ukraine summit. The first speaker on behalf of the Council is Paul Jonsson, Minister for Defence. You have the floor, sir.
President, honourable members, Commissioner, I would like to thank the European Parliament for its strong and continued engagement on Ukraine. Your interest in the preparations of tomorrow's 24th EU-Ukraine summit is much welcome. This will be the first summit since Russia launched its full-scale invasion and also the first one since Ukraine was granted EU candidate status. The EU will use this occasion to reiterate our message loud and clear. The EU is strongly condemning Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine, and it will continue supporting Ukraine as long as it takes, both politically, financially, military, and with humanitarian aid. In response to Russia's aggression and with the support of this Parliament, the EU has so far mobilized over 37 billion euros, including 18 billion euros on microfinancial support packages for 2023. The estimated total amount of EU and Member States' military support is about 12 billion euros. This brings the overall support of the EU and its Member States to Ukraine close to 50 billion euros. In addition, the EU has offered assistance to the millions of Ukrainians who have fled the war. Our combined pressure on Russia and other responsible actors through 9 packages of sanctions is also unprecedented, cutting off Russia from the technology and revenues it needs to continue its war of aggression. We will continue working on restrictive measures and their full implementation. Honourable members, EU-Ukraine bilateral relations are stronger than ever. The EU has obtained the status of EU candidate country. Tomorrow, the EU leaders will reiterate our support and encouragement to Ukraine's reform efforts, which are particularly impressive considering these difficult times. And we will commit to further deepening our relationship, including through the new Priority Action Plan for the DCFTA 2023-2024, easing Ukraine's access to our internal markets. At tomorrow's summit, the EU will reconfirm its support to Ukraine's swift relief and reconstruction, from everything from demining to health and rehabilitation. The EU will reiterate our support for President Zelensky's initiative for just peace and underlying that the EU's commitment to working with the Ukraine to mobilize broad international support. It is important to underline that Ukraine's genuine stance for peace. Russia has not displayed such a willingness. On the contrary, Russia continues intensifying its brutal war of aggression with global consequences, including when it comes to food security. Honourable members, allow me to praise once again the active and swift support of this Parliament for the EU's macro-financial assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine now has a predictable financing schedule for this year. Ukraine receives the first tranches of €3 billion when no other international funds for 2023 had yet reached the country. We also welcome this Parliament's strong political stance expressed in various resolutions in support of Ukraine and condemning Russia's blatant violation of the international order. Let me be clear, those responsible for war crimes and the other most serious crimes will be held accountable. We will continue supporting the investigations by the International Criminal Court. There can be no impunity of the crimes committed under Russian occupation. We will also need to work to ensure the accountability for the crime of aggression. Tomorrow's summit will once again demonstrate that the EU will continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now continue with the Commission, and on behalf of the Commission, Commissioner Hahn has the floor.
Frau Präsidentin, dear
Madam President,
honourable members, today and tomorrow, the first ever college to government meeting with Ukraine and the 24th EU-Ukrainian summit will take place in Kyiv. They will send a very clear message to Ukraine and beyond about our continued unwavering support to Ukraine for as long as it takes, and our collective strength and resolve in countering Russia's brutal aggression. The College to Government meeting and the summit will provide an opportunity to take stock of the Union's ongoing support to Ukraine across all areas, including financial, humanitarian, energy, budget support, military support and diplomatic outreach. We will discuss the reform efforts by Ukraine, the further alignment of its legislation with the EU, a key, and we will outline further steps to enhance sectoral cooperation. Ukraine's destiny is in Europe. Our common European path was decided last June by granting the status of candidate country to Ukraine. The Commission will support Ukraine throughout the whole accession process. Despite the continuing ruthless attacks of the aggressor, we are seeing a major momentum of reforms in Ukraine. Of course, as we will know, the EU accession path is a marathon, not a sprint. The European Council will decide on the next steps unanimously. The discussions in Kyiv today and tomorrow will focus on reform priorities and the steps necessary to help Ukraine further align its legislation to the Union acquis following the Commission's analytical report, which was just published, complementing the Commission's opinion on Ukraine's EU membership application. To support the reform process and increase Ukraine's resilience, we are announcing a new support package worth €400 million, including €145 million in humanitarian assistance and €305 million in bilateral cooperation. The Commission also confirmed to the Ukrainian government that the setting up of the Secretariat of the Multi-Agency Donors Coordination Platform in Brussels is progressing well, including preparation for secondments from G7 countries and other partners. This announcement followed the first meeting on the 26th of January of the Steering Committee of the Donors Coordination Platform. The coordination platform will be key to help match needs and resources for Ukraine's repair, recovery and reconstruction efforts. Ukraine's accession process works together with its integration in our internal market. The basis of our relationship was already strong with the association agreement and its deep and comprehensive free trade area. The suspension of all tariffs and trade defense measures on Ukraine imports through the autonomous trade measures has benefited both sides, despite the very difficult circumstances. We will propose to extend these measures soon. We will also discuss with Ukraine our support across all relevant areas, such as Ukraine's association to additional EU programs which will strengthen its economy. Moreover, President von der Leyen will propose a suspension of Ukraine's financial contributions for participation in union programs for as long as Ukraine's financial challenges remain. As we urgently continue to cut off Russia's fossil fuel imports, a memorandum of understanding on renewables gases will be also endorsed. The strategic partnership in this area reflects the significant potential in Ukraine and the high degree of integration of renewables in the energy market and in infrastructure. Ukraine's reconstruction cannot be dissociated from Russia's responsibility for its war of aggression. The atrocities committed by Russia in Ukraine will not go unpunished, and all options are on the table to ensure full investigation and prosecution. We support the development of an international center for the prosecution of crime of aggression in Ukraine in The Hague. The objective would be to coordinate investigations of the crime of aggressions against Ukraine and preserve and store evidence for future trials. This coordination center would be linked to the existing joint investigation team supported by Eurojust. Dear colleagues, Russia's military aggression has shown that Ukraine belongs to Europe. We share the same values, the same aspiration for democracy and freedom, and we will stay united for as long as it takes.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Hahn. That brings us to the initial round of speakers on behalf of the groups. First of all, for the Group of European People's Party, Mr. Gahler. Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, what can you say in 1 minute? First of all, Ukraine has to win this war, otherwise it's going to go on ad infinitum. And of course that will affect the status of the free world. Secondly, we have to continue our comprehensive support as long as it's needed. I think there's broad-ranging consensus for this: political, military, financial, humanitarian support. I also agree with what the Commissioner said. The Russian crimes will have to be registered on a systematic basis to make sure that the appropriate legal consequences can be drawn. We have to make sure that the crime of aggression must be prosecuted. Reconstruction has to go hand in hand with the requirements of the accession process. That means we can't see a return to old structures. We have to, with reconstruction, see reform. Also, on domestic politics side, we have to make sure that during the war there aren't false structures established or laws adopted which at the end of the day are not actually compatible with EU law. During the war, we have to keep a watching brief on making sure that false trends aren't followed. Thank you very much, Mr. Gahler. Now, on behalf of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, their chair, Ms. García Pérez.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam President. On the 24th of February, we'll be marking 1 year since the beginning of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, a war that caused a level of destruction and ruin that are difficult to imagine in the Europe of the 21st century. We have witnessed the suffering of the Ukrainian people. The EU is coherent and is standing firm when it comes to the difficulties in Ukraine, we have helped in so many ways. Politically, we have given humanitarian aid, military, economic and financial aid, and we have helped fight against impunity. Total aid to the tune of 49 billion euro. That means that the EU and its member states are the main supporters of Ukraine. And the summit that is going to take place tomorrow in Kyiv not only has to bolster unity between Ukraine and the EU, but also has to bolster the unity among member states. It's only if we stand united that we can move forward and create trust. Our response to Putin has illustrated the potential of the EU when difficult decisions have to be taken. When it comes to the Kyiv summit, Putin has to recognize our real power and strength. For every refugee that has to flee their home, we will respond with the extraordinary humanity and solidarity shown by our societies. For every home, hospital and school that is destroyed, we're going to come down hard with sanctions in order to invest in the reconstruction of Ukraine. And make sure that we tap into the 300 billion euro of frozen Russian reserves. And for each home that Putin has left without heating, hot water and light, then we will build hydrogen pipelines to help. And for every man, woman and child that has been despicably assassinated by Putin, we will respond with international justice. And every time there's a cry for help from President Zelensky, we will respond with the power of our military capabilities. Sending heaven weaponry is a difficult decision, but we've got to do so if we want to avoid a deadlock that will freeze the war until Ukraine is reduced to ashes. Putin cannot win the war and just wants Ukraine to be exhausted and for allies on both sides of the Atlantic to get tired. Military support is vital in order to halt the 500,000 troops that Russia will deploy in the spring and go in order to go back to the positions before the 24th of February last year, and to make sure that the Ukrainian government can engage in peace talks under favorable conditions. Ukraine's victory will not only keep the European dream of its people alive, but should also be the reward that our societies deserve for the huge sacrifices made from the beginning of the war. Turning on the heating, turning on lights, doing the shopping, or tanking up your car have meant personal sacrifices, and the public authorities have to provide support for this. The EU-Ukraine summit has to be used in order to send out a clear message to Ukraine on its European path. Ukraine needs a rule of law with robust institutions that will protect its citizens and that will protect their rights. They will come to the end of this path, and the Ukraine will be able to offer the EU what the EU gets from all its member states: democracy, economic growth and social cohesion. The EU is one of the strongest global powers. We are bold and open to the world. We are a responsible power that strives for peace, and if we trust our union, there are reasons to look towards the future filled with hope, and the responsibility of the Ukrainian people and the rest of European societies that want to live in a free world and continue deciding on our future altogether. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now for the Renew Europe group, its Chairman Stéphane Séjourné has the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And colleagues, the Ukrainians are carrying the burden of European security on their shoulders. However, the Ukrainians are not yet members of our union and are not involved in our decision making. That's why this Parliament has always been carrying the voice of the Ukrainian people. We've always been at the avant-garde. This Parliament has voted for and obtained unprecedented sanctions and embargo on Russian fossil fuels, the granting of the candidate status to Ukraine, and envelopes of financial and military aid. Today, this is a role we continue to play. It's a year now that the Ukrainians have been fighting. Experts tell us this spring can be pivotal. There's a forecast of a new offensive from the Russians of unparalleled violence. We my group welcomes with gratitude and relief the decision of member states and the US to provide tanks to Ukraine. It was a necessary decision, it was a just decision. Nevertheless, my group calls for the efforts to be continued. We need to expand the list of sanctions considerably to 6,000 individuals, the heart of Putin's dictatorship. The progressive integration of Ukraine into the Union is also a key priority. The single market, structural programs, European funds should be progressively extended to our Ukrainian friends. At each stage of sanctions and integration, we know that the Kremlin will threaten us. However, I say this to European leaders: it's not Russia who is fixing red lines here. Russia's already passed the only real red line, which is violating international law, the basis of our collective security. They've stepped over the moral red line, committing war crimes and crime against humanity. Let's not fall into the trap of listen to their propaganda. Blackmail, apocalyptic predictions, we've been hearing them for a year now. Where would Ukraine be today if we had listened to the Kremlin, and what if we needed to listen to the people of Ukraine? Now imagine where Ukraine would be if we stopped listening to them once and for all. Let's not have fear, continue our fight, and let's continue to support Ukraine.
Vielen Dank, Herr Fraktion.
Thank you very much, Chair. Now on behalf of the Greens, Ms. von Kramon-Taubadel.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vizepräsidentin.
Thank you, Vice President.
We have now watched 12 months of Russia's brutal war and 12 months of Ukraine's brave resistance. Against all odds, the people of Ukraine proved to the world that they can and will win this war. For their victory, Ukraine needs our continued support. We must increase the pressure of sanctions on the Russian economy and provide Ukraine with the weapon it needs. The morale and motivation of Ukraine defenders, combined with our Western support, is what truly terrifies Putin. But winning the war alone will not be enough for an EU membership. Other fundamental steps need to be taken, the sooner the better. Even during a war, Ukraine is fighting corruption. This progress should now be made structural and accelerated tenfold. Societies in Europe need assurance that oligarchs pulling dirty schemes, governmental officials stealing from the army, and judges robbing the country will all be brought to justice fairly and transparently. Media freedom cannot be compromised, not even during wartime. Democracy is strong when power is shared, not monopolized. This is what sets apart Ukraine from Russia. Ukraine is a European state with a European future. Its people will not walk the European path alone. They have the entire democratic world behind them. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much. The next speaker should be, on behalf of the ID group, Mr. Bardella. I don't see him in the hemicycle, which means we'll continue with the European Conservatives and Reformist group, Ms. Szydło.
Szanowna Pani Przewodnicząca.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. The future of Ukraine lies within the European Union. Ukraine is determined to put an end to the war as soon as possible, to win the war and to become a member of the European Union. The EU needs Ukraine, just as Ukraine needs the European Union. We need to be more determined, efficient, effective, unequivocal and solidary. We have to show solidarity. If we adopt sanctions, we need to follow them through in a consistent manner. But today, Ukraine mainly needs weapons, arms. It will not win the war without weapons. We are aware of that. But Is it really so that we all have sufficient determination and will to support Ukraine in a military way? Humanitarian aid is needed, economic aid is needed as well. We need to extend our thanks to the European society, to the citizens who have shown how determined they are to support refugees who flee Ukraine and come to our countries. I would like to thank Poland, Polish women and men, and I want to say that I'm proud of Poland, which is showing every day that it really understands that the future of the European Union, the security of the European Union, of us all, depends on Ukraine winning the war, and that we're all doing our best in order to provide support. But let me once again stress that Ukraine needs arms first of all. We must all remember about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the left group. The chairman of the group, Mr. Shirdevan, has the floor. Thank you very much, Madam President. There was a previous speaker who I was listening to very attentively, where we were talking about war and peace in Europe that we're discussing. It's about life and death in our immediate neighbourhood. And I have to admit that I'm disappointed in all of the speeches that have been made to date. There hasn't been an underscoring of returning to peace as quickly as possible in Ukraine. Of course, Russia is responsible and has begun the war against Ukraine. And of course, we provide solidarity to them, to the civilian population above all, who in this war are having to suffer so terribly. And the attacks on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine by Russia are criminal. But all of that doesn't mean that we should fall into some form of tunnel vision and turn solely to military support. On the contrary, because of this terrible war, it is incumbent on us as members of the European Parliament to find paths to peace. Mr. Lula, the Brazilian president, called on the international community, making an offer to work together with China to exert the greatest amount of political pressure on Russia and starting a peace initiative. And I think this European summit of heads of state and government should assume an intention to support that. And I think it's high time to make sure that Mr. Scholz, Mr. Macron, Ms. von der Leyen should go to the United Nations, should go to China, should go to Brazil to work on a serious peace initiative, to demand peace negotiations and to bring a sustainable end to this war. Nobody's in favour of Putin. Our solidarity should be multifaceted for Ukraine. We should work against oligarchs. We should provide financial support for reconstruction and also help European prospects for Ukraine. But the best form of support and aid is to do our utmost to make sure that this horrible war is finished as soon as possible and to exploit all avenues to bring an end to this conflict that's affecting civilians so much. And I hope that in this House there'll be more reflection, and instead of a war, that we look for more jaw. Thank you very much. Now Mr. Deutsch is the next speaker.
Magyarország elítéli az orosz agressziót.
Thank you very much. Hungary condemns the Russian aggression. We are, of course, stand by Ukraine and defend its territorial integrity. Ukraine's accession to the EU is important, and we've been helping the Ukraine with so much energy since the beginning of the invasion. Hungary's humanitarian program means that we've welcomed more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees. But on the basis of the most recent decisions, European bureaucrats have said that Russian sanctions are putting Russia in such difficulty that Russia won't be able to continue its war. And yet the war continues to be brutal. So what they said would happen hasn't happened. On the contrary, since the beginning of the sanctions, inflation has soared, the financial crisis has been continuing, the economic crisis, and the sanctions are destroying Europe. We need peace, and that is why we need a ceasefire. We don't want war in Europe any longer. Europe should try and move forward with peace talks. We have to do everything we can in the interest of peace.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the other speakers from the groups. First of all, Ms. Yuknevichenie, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, Russia must be defeated and expelled from Ukrainian soil not someday, but this year. This requires hundreds of tanks, fighter jets and long-range missiles, now. Ukraine must be invited to EU membership negotiations not someday, but this year. Our goal is to grant EU membership to Ukraine before the end of this decade. Bold and swift EU's decisions on Ukraine's future in EU will help the country to ultimately defeat Putin. NATO must welcome Ukraine through its open doors, not at some point in the future, but as soon war hostilities on its territory end. That means this year. We have to be ready for that. The EU must act as a geopolitical leader, because this is a historic chance for us all. We need Ukraine.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin, und es schließt.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Marques, you have the floor.
Dankeschön, Frau Präsident.
Thank you, President.
Conselho.
Council, Commissioner, dear colleagues, the war of aggression against Ukraine will go down in history as one of the major crimes against international law, against a country, against a people. Now, Putin has totalitarian fantasies, but he will be condemned by history and he will be remembered in Russia as the individual who led the country into an unfair war. The EU has provided support for Ukraine, and we must continue that. So therefore we support strengthening economic and humanitarian, macro-financial, political support and military support as well, so that Ukraine continue to defend itself, sustain its economy and help its people. We want Europe to continue united without divisions between the countries. Along, we need to stand with Zelensky and his people. We want, as early as possible, we can build an avenue to peace.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Austrevicius, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, Council Representative, Commissioner, dear colleagues, as a project for peace and cooperation, the European Union has withstood many historical challenges and remain highly appreciated and enjoyed by its citizens. Ukraine's aspiration to join our Union is an understandable, logical and right choice. For Ukraine, the European Union membership means choosing between democracy and Russian authoritarianism, between freedom and occupation. The granting of candidate status to Ukraine has justified the EU's nature as an open and forward-looking geopolitical actor. Our trusted partner, who continues democratic reforms while resisting Russia's war of aggression, needs to be invited to start accession negotiations now. Such a decision will not only testify to our commitment to our neighborhood policy, but will also strengthen Ukraine as a state, rise the spirits of Ukrainians and give them hope. For those who hesitate, allow me to encourage you in words of Robert Schuman, spoken on a day of signing the Schuman Declaration. Start of the quote. World peace cannot be safeguarded without the making of creative efforts proportionate to the dangers which threaten it. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you very much. Now Mr. Lagodinsky has the floor.
Wer hätte das noch vor einem Jahr gedacht?
Who would have thought a year ago that this European Union would be able to show that we can meet the challenges on historic occasions? Who would have thought that? Now we have to make our European Union in a future-proof shape for further enlargement, so that Ukraine, the Ukrainian society and economy be fit for the Union. Our Ukrainian friends know that we're on their side, but we need to tread this path together, and that is our logic of peace. That is our logic of peace. We don't always agree with the Commission, but on this occasion, on this journey that the Commission is taking to Kyiv, is something that's happening on behalf of all citizens of the European Union. They want to see our logic of peace. They want to see evidence of that, because they're seeing attacks, humiliation and plunder. But the Ukrainian people have stood against this robustly, because these people want freedom and peace, and we will support them. Thank you, Mr. Lagodinsky. Ms. Bonfrisco is the next speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Minister Johnson. And good morning to Commissioner Hahn as well. Those who believe in the principles and values of the current rule-based order in the world will have to fight against Russian aggression for different reasons. We cannot accept the use of force to take territory of other countries. We cannot allow the return of imperialism and colonialism. We cannot remain indifferent while the civilians are being massacred. This war is between an invading dictatorship and a country that is defending itself. Now we have to look at our response to Russian aggression. We have to make sure that we work with NATO allies and like-minded partners. We have to dissuade China from the temptation of annexing Taiwan and getting rid of democracy in Taiwan. We have to promote fundamental freedoms and the social model that sets us apart. We've got to strengthen our leadership in global strategic partnerships. We have to support the rule of law all over the world, because it's only the rule of law that supports and creates peace between peoples and countries. So therefore, our parliamentary role today is to make sure that our citizens obtain the right information and that we can guarantee consensus. We have to increase the military expenditure of our sovereign countries and the West. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Kollegin. Und wir
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Fotyga, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, I'm deeply grateful for all Europeans do for Ukraine. In particular, I'm proud of my people. Now, let me tell quickly and shortly. It's sanctions, sanctions, sanctions without circumventing of them. Weapons that are necessary to defeat Russia delivered to Ukraine immediately, and real fighting impunity, including crime of aggression, not just as a slogan used but by NGOs. And Commissioner, running marathon in times of earthquake and people shedding their blood for our values is not advisable. We have to have clear timeline for agreed with Ukraine for accession of the EU and NATO. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Wallace, you have the floor.
Zelensky has now banned 12 opposition parties and used the war to carry through deeply anti-democratic labour reforms. The International Trade Union Confederation, which unites more than 200 million workers worldwide, are protesting against the laws. General Secretary Sharon Burrows said in a statement, "It is grotesque that Ukrainian workers who defend the country and care for the injured, sick and displaced are now being attacked by their own parliament." Zelensky is attacking the people and structures necessary for a country to win a war. He's forcing through the most dramatic privatisation programme in the country's history, a fire sale of public assets to Western vulture funds. What will that do for Ukrainian society? Since when did handing over public assets to big business ever help the people of any country? This is a programme for even deeper corruption and inequality. The EU is promising the sun, moon and stars to Ukraine, including fast-tracking EU accession. Be careful what you wish for.
Thank
you very much. We now go on to Mr. Nicolaou Alavanos.
Η συζήτηση που διεξάγεται
The debate today and the resolution in itself speak volumes. The US, the EU and NATO and their respective governments are escalating war operations by sending armoured vehicles, and they also want to send fighter jets. On the Russian side, they're escalating their operations, especially in Donbass. There is this imperialist war, and it's the Ukrainian people and the Russian people that are giving up their lives for this. And the EU is escalating the situation and, of course, is looking at energy agreements and investments to the tune of billions of euro and competing against the US to do so. These agreements are jeopardizing the future of the Ukrainian people in order to secure capitalist profits. And this clearly shows that war stems from a monopoly rivalry. It is carried out by the bourgeoisie, and it's the peoples that die so that masters can have their meals. And in Greece, so many parties are supporting this. They are fueling the escalation. Not only are they not protecting fundamental rights, but the people are the target. It's only the people who have to throw off the yoke and make sure that we put an end to these murderous alliances.
Thank you very much. Mr. Halicki is the next speaker.
Szanowni Państwo, wszyscy chcemy, by...
Ladies and gentlemen, we all want to have peace in Europe, but in order for this to happen, Ukraine has to win this war. That we need to realize together, which is why this summit is so important. It's so important for it to end with specific actions, because there is no time for reconsidering what equipment we're going to send. The soonest possible, as much as possible, the most serious and the heaviest equipment, not only Leopards, missiles, fighter planes, everything. Ukraine has to win this war because it's fighting for Europe's future. It's fighting for us as well. Then sanctions. We've heard about sanctions many times already. They must be even heavier, even stronger, more symbolic. Let's remember, next year there is going to be Olympic Games without Russian athletes, without Belarusian athletes. They cannot represent countries which are aggressors, which attacked other countries in Europe. Those are symbolic gestures as well. Olympics are for peace, so sanctions and more assistance to Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Cimoshevich.
Madam President, war is progressing. Before it will come to an end, it will escalate. Ukraine cannot lose this war because this would destroy the European order based on rule of law. We will continue all assistance for the Ukrainian nation. We will help in rebuilding the country after the war as well. We want Ukraine to join us in the European Union, and we are ready to open a path for quick commencement of accession negotiations. It will be needed to give the people hope. But everyone must understand that enlargement is not only a political process, and we cannot make promises that we cannot keep because we are risking disappointment. The heroism of Ukrainian soldiers is admirable. People are suffering. That requires our compassionate understanding and solidarity. Helping refugees is a moral test. We shall persevere. Ukraine will prevail, and the European dream will come true for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Verhofstadt.
Thank you very much. It's a pity that Mr. Shirdovan is not longer in the room. After everything what he said, he should go to Kramatorsk maybe, where yesterday, again, an apartment block was brutally attacked and destroyed by Russia. The only way to end this war is a victory of Ukraine. That's the way to end the war the fastest as possible. And for that, I hope, Mr. Hahn, you are in direct contact with Mrs. von der Leyen, I suppose, on what she will do in Kiev. My impression is that it is a weak proposal what you are bringing to Kiev. On weapons, for example, I see no long-range missiles in the package. On sanctions, Mr. Séjourné has said it, it's already a year that we are asking to put the whole backbone of the Russian Putin regime under sanctions regime. And the Commission is not moving on that. The same on the assets, the frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank. It's possible to seize them, to freeze them, and to transfer them to Ukraine. That's possible. There is the legal service of the Council, Mr. Hahn. That's something that cannot be disputed. And they have said that it is possible. And finally, a fast-track membership to 2026. If I see what is happening on corruption in Hungary, I think, and I see the actions that are happening in Ukraine, Ukraine deserves its place in Europe. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege. Und wir
Thank you very much. Moving on now, Ms. Gregorova, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and dear colleagues. I am an unapologetic fan of EU enlargement, which is why I welcome President Zelensky's commitment to reforms, changing legal, social and political reality to align with our European acquis, even during wartime. I have high hopes for the upcoming summit to bring Ukraine even closer to the EU family. In the European family, they already are. Furthermore, the summit must convey strengthened commitment also from the EU in political, economic and military assistance, but also reinforce its humanitarian support, especially the issue of forced filtration of people in Russian-occupied territories and deportation Far East, as well as forced readoption of children into Russian families. The summit also brings an opportunity to discuss all necessary instruments to try Russia for all the committed crimes, which is a must for the international order. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau.
Thank you very much. Now we have Mr. Bardella.
The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. A political leader should always strive for peace within and peace outside, so within a nation and between nations. And if we don't have this, then freedom disappears. We can be fragile and can be broken at any moment. Almost a year ago, Russia invaded Ukraine, committed crimes against the civilian population, and has illegally occupied a big part of its territory. By doing this, Moscow has given the Ukrainians a common enemy and has given them a spirit of resistance, a more intense and concrete existence compared to before. All the peoples of the world, including obviously the Ukraine, have to be able to resist the shadow of the empire. Ukraine has legitimate right and even the duty to defend its territory, its integrity and borders. As far as we're concerned, history concerns us and has taught us peace is very fragile, and we're very aware of this on our continent. So we have the duty to make sure that the rest of Europe doesn't fall into war and this terrible machinery. We need to provide assistance and aid to our neighbor that has been attacked. We have to open our arms to the refugees and help with military equipment, but we're giving tanks that France doesn't even have for its own use. But this could lead to more escalation and co-belligerence. Let us remember that we were talking yesterday about military equipment for defense. Now we're talking of just a handful of tanks, and then we're going to be talking about fighter jets, and who knows, even nuclear weapons in the future. Russia's devastating whole landscapes, families and homes. we have to be very careful of not discarding the possibility of peace. Saying that peace is impossible means that war will be more probable than ever. We have to make sure that peace conditions exist. Only a big continental peace treaty will continue to offer the whole of Europe the stability it needs in a world that is already marked by geopolitical instability. We need to talk about peace and to strive for it. That doesn't mean that we're sacrificing the independence and freedom of the Ukraine. On the contrary, it's the opposite. If we want peace, we need to pave the way through our deeds and words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zimniok. The next speaker.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, despite all the sanction measures that have been adopted, the IMF considers that the Russian economy continues to grow, and yet our citizens are becoming impoverished because of inflation and food price inflation. So we know that only China, Turkey and obviously the US are profiting from these sanctions. We're being a bit naive in this parliament. In April 2022, Mr. Zelensky allowed negotiations to fall once he got some weapons ensured. So the result has been civilians and soldiers being killed needlessly, cities, towns and villages being destroyed, and no realistic chance for a Ukrainian victory. Nevertheless, you want to continue and extend the provision of arms because 10,000s of people being killed is not enough for you. So I'm calling on the EU states to leave this obvious wrong path and accept that we need to deal with a different reality than the one you seem to see in Parliament. This is an undignified loss of life.
Bitte schön.
Please.
Dinsky.
Mr. Lagodinsky, please. The next speaker is Mr. Waszczykowski.
To use your mic.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to support all those colleagues who mentioned that to end this war, Ukraine has to win the war. To win the war, firstly, we have to provide all kind of assistance to Ukraine. This is what I expect firstly from the summit. Political, economic and military assistance, all kind of weapons supposed to be delivered to win the war. And secondly, what I expect from the summit, a clear and fast perspective of membership of the European Union based on Copenhagen criteria and acquis communautaire, nothing else. We cannot treat Ukraine as a guinea pig, as a laboratory of liberal left visions. Thank you.
Dankeschön, Herr Kollege.
Thank you very much. Now Mr. Willemsen has the floor.
Let us stand in solidarity with Ukraine, the brave train and truck drivers, the nurses, the municipal workers, the miners, the farmers. They keep the country running, often unnoticed and poorly paid, and they bleed and die because of Putin's war of aggression. Their courage and that of civil society and trade unions is amazing. They need our help now. They will also need our help once the bullets stop flying and the aggressor withdraws. Dear Commissioner, one thing the summit can do, one thing the summit should do, is to make sure that Ukraine is not weighted down by having to repay huge amounts to its creditors the moment the hostilities end. This will give Ukraine the possibility to take care of its population, to protect those who bore the cost of the war, to build a fair future.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Now Mr. Ulrich has the floor.
I'm listening you talking about wars, about weapons, about sanctions, rackets, fighter jets, etc., but nobody has yet appealed to peace. The war in Ukraine has been going on for more than a year, and the politicians have been fighting who's more pro-Russian, who's more pro-Ukrainian, but you keep forgetting that you should especially take care of your own nations, of course. It's easy shouting, let's send more weapons, let's send more missiles, let's make the war bigger, because you, colleagues, politicians, are not going to the war. That it would be real people who would be fighting in the war, regular people, but regular people are sick of the high prices and of the dying. And I would really wish in the next summit between the EU and Ukraine would bring not only more appeals to sending missiles and tanks, but if it would bring real solutions and real appeals to peace. And if I could decide, I would be trying for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Morishan.
Vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Thank you very
much.
Dear colleagues, we have all seen this year that we can only live in safety and stability within the borders of the European Union if we are surrounded in our eastern neighborhood by countries which are safe, stable, at peace. This is why I am telling to you today that the fight that the people of Ukraine are fighting is also our fight. This is why it is right to support Ukraine, and it is also in the fundamental interest of the European Union to support Ukraine. We did a lot this year, and I think we can be proud of what we did in terms of sanctions, in terms of financial support. The 18 billion euros put forward by the European Commission will allow the Ukrainian state to function this year, to pay salaries, to pay pensions, to keep hospitals, to keep schools going. And Commissioner Hahn, thank you for your personal engagement also for making this possible. We did a lot, but more has to be done. And we do not need excuses for what cannot be done, but we need arguments and solutions on what can be done. More on sanctions, support financially as much as is needed, and make sure that even before EU accession becomes possible, we bring Ukraine closer to European projects. Integration into the single market will help Ukraine, will help ourselves, and the principle, whatever we do for Ukraine, we do for Moldova as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Pizzula. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I welcome this initiative to gather in Kyiv to witness the extraordinary courage and resilience of Ukrainians and show our support. Yes, this is the first European Union summit to be held in the country where war is raging, so its historical significance must meet tangible results with clear guidelines and plans for immediate future. The key message of the summit must be that we stand with Ukraine and count on its European Union perspective. Furthermore, I think it's essential for our citizens to clarify some doubts, fears and even propaganda that Ukraine is rejecting diplomatic solutions. Since the 90s, there have been many diplomatic initiatives, Minsk I and II, Normandy format, let alone Budapest Memorandum, and they were all bluntly disrespected by Russia when it started its aggression. Yes, peace should remain the ultimate goal, but as they pay the highest possible price in this war, true peace for Ukrainians only means their victory over invaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Tudoraki. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear Commissioner, dear Council, representatives, dear colleagues. It is said that time and resources are everything in wartime. I would add hope and morale. I hear more and more arguing that giving hope to Ukraine and Moldova last year when accepting their candidate status was wrong because it created false expectations. Well, yes, that historic decision did create expectations, legitimate expectations that once we went down the path of thinking and acting strategically, geopolitically, that we would stay on that path. Working hard to start the process of accession negotiations, like our resolution says, is a minimum that we must do to be consistent with ourselves and with the commitment that we made to the Ukrainian cause and people. We cannot afford fatigue or commodity just like the Ukrainians on the front cannot. Let's be courageous in maintaining hope for a Ukraine that wants to be in the European family. Slava Ukraini. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Dalunde. Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, Ukraine belongs to Europe. the Russian regime and Vladimir Putin are trying to apply their versions of history, their falsification of history, by saying that Ukraine doesn't exist as a nation, that it's actually the same nation as Russia. And that is a falsification of history. If you look back through history, then yes, obviously there are ties to Russia. But there are more and stronger ties, for example, to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. There are many other links to Austria, to Germany. If you go even further back to Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, it is not by chance that there is a growing democratic force in Ukraine that makes it different to Russia. And that's why Russia is scared. That's why Russia is trying to falsify history, because they're trying to see Ukraine as something different. But Ukraine belongs in Europe. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Wilimski. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, what I can't understand is that all those speakers who come up and talk about promoting peace and peace negotiations then give rise to this massive state of indignancy from you. We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people who have died. Difficult to know how many soldiers have died. So if you times that by what you might expect, we're talking about 250,000 people who are killed or injured in this situation. I say this has to be stopped. We have to do everything to promote peace, to promote peace negotiations and start those negotiations. With your policies of sanctions and provision of weapons, you got tanks that you're talking about. We've heard mention of jets and submarines and who knows what. I think that's the wrong approach. I would like Europe that was based on peace and prosperity for all, that we push for peace and bring an end finally to this dying. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Czarnecki.
Bitte schön, der Herr Kollege Tarn.
Please, Mr. Czarnecki has the floor, nobody else.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to correct some fake news that have been spread in this hall. With all due respect to colleagues, we must not say that we want to send our soldiers to Ukraine. This is not true. What we discuss is the dispatching of arms, and arms must be sent to Ukraine, but it would be wrong to assume that it would be wrong to mislead the European public opinion by saying that we want to send troops. One of our colleagues from Germany said that Russia is a beneficiary of this war, that their economy is growing. This is not true. They are registering a reduction in GDP by 3.3%. Although initial estimates had been greater, we anticipated 15% drop. So we must not say that Russia is winning by waging war. And let me say that this is a very important summit and we need to support Ukraine in the NATO.
Thank you very much. Now Mr. Radachowski.
In connection with the summit EU-Ukraine, I have a very pragmatic question. We're all convinced that together with the US we will defeat Russia. But do we also have a plan B? What if we don't defeat Russia? Nobody has managed to do so in history. As a Slovak and Slav, I would like to ask our West European friends, your fathers, your grandfathers, when fighting Russia in the Second World War, they ended up killing around 20 million of Slavs, Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Serbs, and as a bonus, also 6 million innocent Jews. What do you think? How many Ukrainians and Russians will be killed by the time this war ends? But you probably don't care. You simply have it in your genes. Just stop this madness, because you will end up choking on the Slav blood. Let's negotiate ceasefire, let's negotiate peace, And all the excuses referring to Napoleon, to Hitler, to Putin, it's just not acceptable. Otherwise, you will end up shooting each other as rabbits.
Thank
you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Kubilius.
Dear colleagues, the keys to sustainable peace on the European continent are in the hands of Ukraine. Sustainable peace in Europe is possible only if Russian people will transform their country back to democracy, because democracies are not fighting each other. The West needs to have a strategy how to assist such a transformation. First of all, Russia needs to be deputinized. This means total military defeat of Russia, international tribunal for Putin, and an invitation for Ukraine to become a member of NATO. Such an invitation would send the most powerful signal to Russians that the dream to restore their empire is gone. From another side, EU needs to assist Russians with an inspirational example of success of Ukraine. Such a success of Ukraine can be created only through Ukraine's integration into EU, just like the success story of the Central Europe was created. Ukraine's geopolitical integration into the West is no less important than Leopards or Abrams for Ukraine's defense, because this is the only way to sustainable peace on the European continent. And that is why summit should establish the integration Ramstein in order also to deliver integration.
Thank you, Mr. Kubilius. Now, Ms. Yoncheva, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Today, the war in Ukraine is about to turn into a huge European catastrophe. There are millions of people who are afraid that the conflict can expand. The people who believe that sending tanks and heavy weaponry is going to lead to an end to this war, but I'm not sure this is the case. What is the next step? What are we going to send tomorrow? Fighter jets? Troops? Nuclear arms? Ukraine is standing against a military power that has a huge nuclear potential. If we keep on like this, Ukraine is condemned to a very long war that is going to damage it for a long time. What I don't hear from Brussels is negotiations, and we need negotiations. It's important for the citizens of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Loiseau. You have the floor, madam.
Dear colleagues, now more than ever, Ukraine needs our aid. But I'm hearing strange noises from Europe. We have provided military aid, but some people say that we are involved in this war now, and they should not be listened to. They are lying, clearly, and they are the ones who are linked to Russia. There are no European troops in Ukraine. We merely give them the method to defend themselves. We need to remain resolute. With every day we lose without sending military aid, it's more lives lost. I think Ukraine is also wanting to join the EU. We need to make sure that they slow down. However, in Ukraine continuing with its reforms whilst being at war, there's a fight against corruption from President Zelensky, which is unprecedented. Let's say it quite clearly. There's certain member states that should be doing the same thing. I think that we should be adopting more sanctions against Russia. However, our economies are resisting better than expected. Russia has not stepped back from its aggression, and they're testing our determination. We will be wrong to step back.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Saryusz-Wolski.
For Ukraine, a decisive moment approaches with a new Russian offensive coming. Ukraine needs boost, not cold shower and nice words. Ukraine is not getting enough and quickly enough. There is no reason for EU being so self-satisfied and self-congratulatory, Mr. Commissioner, for what it does for Ukraine because it does things below its needs, below the needs of Ukraine, below EU capacity. On weapons, EU is underperforming compared to US. Cowardly, hesitant and overcautious attitudes prevail. Ukraine needs fighter jets and long-range artillery now. On money, EU is performing far below its weight, gives loans instead of grant money. That leads Ukraine into a sovereign debt crisis. On accession perspective, many urge to dash Ukraine's hopes for swift EU accession and call them unrealistic. There are mainly Russian understanders and
Please, your time is over. Come to an end. Thank you. So, ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Gunyoshi.
Dear colleagues, the people of Ukraine expressed unequivocally their desire to join the community of Western democracies instead of Moscow's tyranny. Europe was right to hear that desire and grant candidate status to Ukraine. However, full membership has conditions that need to be fulfilled. Sustainable peace and stability need to be attained prior to integration in order to avoid taking on a divided country with internal division. We have had that negative experience before and suffered the consequences. Thus, sustainable peace and stability in the Ukraine have two prerequisites: restoring the territorial integrity of Ukraine in full. The EU needs to help Ukraine to win this war with all it has. Second, Ukraine needs to reach out to ethnic minorities living in its territory, all of them, and guarantee their rights as Ukrainian citizens and ethnic minorities. The EU should support that endeavor by providing best practices to Ukraine and help the transition. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Und als nächstes.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Myanmar.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We have to continue helping Ukraine in these decisive moments, including increasing the sending of weaponry. We have to make sure that almost the whole international community joins forces and condemns Russian aggression. There are still too many countries that incomprehensibly sit on the fence or remain neutral. I just don't understand. We have to make sure that we look at the issue of sanctions and that they join the sanctions that Western and like-minded countries have gone for. The least that we should do is make sure that third countries don't help Russia get around the sanctions. I heard about the case of South Africa, and their attitude is unacceptable. I hope that Mr. Borrell, who went there, was persuasive, and that the South African authorities will start changing their position. We all have to be on our guard and make sure that our countries enforce these sanctions. The UK have increased twofold the number of staff working in the Treasury. Interruption by the President.
Thank you very much. Mr. Negrescu is the next speaker. You have the floor.
Ucraina se luptă nu doar pentru independența.
Ukraine is not only fighting for its own independence, it's fighting for us as well. The brutal attack of the Russian Federation against Ukraine was just the beginning of a bloody plan meant to reconquer influence in the region. The support of the EU, of the United States and NATO allies has allowed a blocking of this offensive, but the risk continues to be very high. The threat of a new Russian attack still exists. An increased military presence on the eastern flank and in the NATO countries, including Romania, support for Ukraine, support for Moldova, maintaining sanctions against Russia. All these measures are essential for victory and for possible future peace negotiations. At the same time, we need to increase the European capacity for military production, especially in the frontline states. We need to support the population in order to increase the resiliency of our society, but also we should rebuild Ukraine on a new basis, based on the fight against corruption and based on the rights of all minorities. We can win this war, but in order to do this, European leaders must do that by maintaining our values and our unity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Negrescu. Now, Mr. Ranchiel, you have the floor.
Vorsitzenden, Council, dear Commissioner. Há quase ano.
Almost a year ago, Ukraine was horrifically attacked by the Russian regime. Every day, every week, war crimes are being committed in Ukraine. In this summit between the EU and Ukraine, it's absolutely vital to ensure that we maintain financial support, humanitarian support, logistical support, and all that support which is necessary to strengthen the military capacity of Ukraine. Finally, the European Union and NATO have made tanks available to Ukraine. Unfortunately, we see that the Portuguese government continues to hesitate. There's discussions between the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Minister. The Portuguese government continues to be against the European integration of Ukraine. We all have to make an effort to support President Zelensky in Ukraine in military terms, humanitarian terms, and in financial terms.
Dankeschön.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you. The next speaker is Ms. Blinkevičiūtė. You have the floor.
Ačiū pirmininkė, kolegos.
Thank you, President, colleagues. It will soon be 1 year since Ukraine and its people are fighting for their freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Unjustified military aggression of Russia has irreversibly changed the geopolitical situation of Europe and the whole world, and the whole world has seen the true face of Russia and the Kremlin regime. So it's time to mobilize and make bold political, economic, and financial decisions to help Ukraine fight and defeat Russian aggression. Let's not forget that Ukraine's victory over Russia is a guarantee of security, freedom, and democracy for us all. That's why concrete solutions must be made for a special tribunal for the Russian crime of aggression, for the compensation to victims, for the fund for recovery of Ukraine, and for sustainable help, military and otherwise, to Ukraine, and also the determination to support membership of Ukraine in the EU.
Mandel.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mandel is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. It has been nearly a year that Putin Russia has waged war, also militarily against Ukraine, but the hybrid warfare against all of us, the free world, especially Europe, was already ongoing for many years, also in February last year, and has been ongoing now for many years. But Europe defends its citizens, its freedom, and wants to achieve peace with means and measures unprecedented. This was not expected by Putin Russia, and this is why we have to underline that Europe is using the European Peace Facility exactly for what it was meant to be used for. And Europe is also fighting back in a bloodless way against the bloody war attack in terms of sanctions. Yes, within Europe, the leadership of Serbia is of concern, the leadership of Hungary is of concern, but the alignment and the unity are unprecedented and will remain. So it's good to have the EU-Ukraine summit this week. It's good to talk about even more help in terms of military, in terms of sanctions, in terms of reconstruction in the future. And I have no doubt that freedom and peace will be restored.
Thank
you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Băsescu.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Commissioner Hahn.
Critical infrastructure, civilian and military, of Ukraine is daily being hit by rockets launched by aviation, by ships from terrestrial sites, and this gravely affects the population and the capacity of the Ukrainian army. In order to give a chance to Ukraine to defend its national territory, we must make available to the Ukrainian army all the necessary means to neutralize the military logistics, the air bases, the ships, and the sites from which rockets are being launched on the territory of the Russian Federation.
As far as the European road of Ukraine, here, Ukraine must understand that the new minority law which their parliament adopted must be modified in the sense suggested by the Venice Commission in order to guarantee the rights of minorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
much. The next speaker is Mr. Dorfmann. Thank you, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. The war in Ukraine has also affected food security and food supplies in Europe and the rest of the world. It's good that the Commission has tried to find and open up new ways to get food out of Ukraine, especially after a closure of Black Sea routes. But the new export routes directly to the European Union have had effects in farmers, especially in the eastern and southern parts of the European Union, and has caused headaches for them. Even if a small amount of the exports in meat, for example, are being provided to third countries, more than 60% of maize and sunflower is ending up here, which of course gives rise to problems. Of course, we want to open up possibilities for Ukrainian farmers to sell their products to the European Union, but we don't want our farmers to be put under pressure as a result. So we have to assume that responsibility and help our farmers in the EU. But then we have to make sure in the coming years and months and years, we have to make sure that the process to approximate Ukraine to the EU, that we can keep an eye on that.
So, damit kommen wir als nächstes.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Terras. You have the floor.
Vielen Dank, Frau Vorsitzende. Dear colleagues, Ukraine has fought bravely against Russia for almost 9 years. The full-scale attack that Russia launched in February last year is a clear sign that Putin's regime goal is to destroy Western way of life. Our task is to help Ukraine as much as they need today. Ukraine needs more weapons, and Ukraine needs a plan for recovery. The EU-Ukraine summit must give Ukraine a message of hope. Ukraine belongs to the European family. Last but not least, Russian and Belarusian athletes should not compete on the Paris Olympic Games next year. I'm collecting your support. Give your signature to the letter I will send to the President of the European Council. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege. Und
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Stevanet.
Na Ukrainie.
Thank you. Today, what's being decided in Ukraine is the future of Europe, whether we protect life, whether we protect the rights of the weak, and whether they can democratically decide on the future, or whether the other side will win, the other side that has no respect to life, no respect to the law, and just listen to its dictator. The Ukrainians are now protecting the freedom of the whole of Europe. It's our moral duty today to help them and to increase not only economic and humanitarian aid, but also military aid. This is important for the future of Europe, and it's been long talked about the defense of Europe, about the European army. What we see today is that we already have the European army. It is precisely the Ukrainian army. We have been talking about the peace project, but nobody has done more for the peace project in Europe than Ukrainians. So therefore, we need to help Ukraine on the European path. We need to put a very concrete shape to the accession process, and we need to talk about the increase of economic collaboration at the summit, about the increase of the area for roaming calls, or cooperation in energy area. All of this would be helpful not only to the Ukrainian citizens, but especially and also to the EU citizens.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Time. So we have more than 5 requests for the Catch the Eye, but as we are good in time, I can take them all. So be prepared, and we start with our colleague Olekskas. Please, 1 minute.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. You were right in saying that the future of Ukraine is in Europe, but today we decide the future of Europe in Ukraine, and that's why we can achieve peace in the only way. If all the soldiers of Putin leave the territory of Ukraine and the territorial integrity is restored in Ukraine, so the summit should talk about abolishing all the gaps in sanctions, the military tribunal, and all the weapons to Ukraine are provided to chase out the aggressor. And the negotiations on Ukraine's membership are started this year. I'd like to draw your attention. It's very important to connect Ukraine to the EU. We have to think about transport links, especially railways. I'd like to thank on this occasion the people of my country who donate to Ukraine and take the refugees in their homes. Glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Ms. Demirel, 1 minute.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The EU could turn this EU-Ukraine summit into a peace summit, but instead they're turning the clock back as if this were 1914, and they're saying that Ukraine has to win this battle on the battlefield. What the Mark Milley said as head of the Chief of Staff in the US, he said it's impossible for Ukraine to win this war militarily. So as NATO states, would you like to kick off the Third World War officially? If not, then stop these calls for going to the battlefield. Look for a political solution. Ukraine has never been as dependent on the West, economically and militarily, than now. Don't exploit this shamelessly. Don't keep sending Ukrainians to their death. Find a solution, because the EU would be party to the war. On the battlefield, the poor people from Ukraine are bleeding to death, and from Russia. So my call is to all of those parties to war, the direct and indirect ones, with NATO and the rest, stop this war.
Wir kommen als nächstes zum Herrn.
Mr. Kyrtsos is the next speaker. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Ukraine has already lost almost 20% of its territory to the Russian aggressor. That means we should increase the EU support to Kyiv in order to liberate the occupied territories. We should increase the financial and military assistance at least to the level of the United States of America. After all, we are dealing with a European war. We all know that if the Russians are not stopped and defeated in Ukraine, they will continue towards Moldova, the Baltic states, maybe Poland. During the past 20 years, we have been encouraging Ukraine's European ambitions without offering adequate support. Our goal should be the integration of Ukraine in the European Union based on an unprecedented program of economic support. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Ms. Grappini. 1 minute.
Mulțumesc, doamna președintă, domnule ministru, domnule.
Thank you, Madam President, Minister, Commissioner. Let me first thank my fellow Romanian countrymen who have helped millions of Ukrainian refugees since last year when this bloody conflict started. Yes, I think we should do everything we can in order to stop the killing of civilian population. Innocent people are being killed there. And I think that your message, Commissioner, given today is a shy message for peace. We should give support, diplomatic support, but we should also give support to the citizens, because civilians there do not have food, do not have water, do not have anything, and we must also focus on diplomatic support. But Ukraine must understand that it must respect the rights of minorities, and that is why I urge you, Commissioner, to check the law of the minorities in Ukraine, because Romanian minority in Ukraine is not allowed to speak Romanian, to educate itself in Romania, and now there are persecutions against Orthodox priests, Romanian priests. Thank you.
To inform you, you are all on the list. I just mix up a little bit the groups because of different positions. Like this, the discussion is maybe a little bit more interesting. So next is Mr. Pineda, please.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It will be 1 year since the war of aggression in Ukraine carried out by Russia. And once again, we reiterate our condemnation. We've been doing it from the outset. But we feel that the EU is doing the opposite to what we should be doing in the situation. We cannot feel that we're waging this war by harnessing NATO and sending weaponry. It's not the people that win wars, it's the people that sacrifice their lives by doing this. We cannot feel that by sending weaponry we're going to win the war and win back the territory. We also think it's painful that we have buried diplomacy and look what President Lula has said. Together with Mexico, China and the Vatican, they are clamoring for a political and diplomatic solution. We want diplomacy to make the tanks quiet. Thank you.
Mr. Lopez Aguilar is the next speaker. 1 minute.
Gracias, Presidenta. Thank you, President. Commissioner Hahn, when it's been 12 months of an illegal, illegitimate war of aggression against Ukraine, we need to have commitment to sanctions against Russia. We also need to show solidarity with the people of Ukraine who are suffering from this war. We have supported the confiscation of assets from oligarchies. We've also strengthened Eurojust and ensuring cooperation with the International Criminal Court so that we can ensure there's no impunity for war crimes. We've also supported the setting up of a special tribunal on the crime of aggression. However, from the 11 million people who are fled from this war, 4 million wanted to stay in the EU indefinitely, and this means that we need to strengthen the budget lines within the EU budget to support solidarity in member states so they can help these vulnerable people. We also need to ensure that there's schooling for children, and above all, for these people there will be support from the S&D group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To conclude, Ms. Ruiz de Vesa, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Yes. Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you, Bear, for being generous under this catch-the-eye procedure. I'll be brief. 6, 7, 8 months is what we've spent debating among allies, trying to decide whether we were going to send tanks to Ukraine or not. And it was glaringly obvious from the outset that it is absolutely necessary to give the Ukrainian government and its people all the necessary means to be able to tackle this aggression and to get back their sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now we're looking at long-range missiles and fighter jets. That's what's on the table at the moment. And in this House, I would like to say, I turn to the allies, the West and NATO. Please don't waste another 6, 7 or 8 months debating this issue. Please cut to the chase and deliver this because the Ukrainian people need it.
Thank you very much. That brings us to the replies. First of all, reply from the Commission. To start with, Commissioner Hahn, you have the floor once again. Thank you very much, President, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for this debate. It has shown once again that there's unrestricted support for Ukraine and its population. This war, I would say, needs to be won. I don't think there is an alternative. I would also like to lead peace negotiations. I think everybody would. I just wonder, where's the Russian delegation? I don't know one. Let's not forget either, there's been much lost sight of in the debate about the re-establishment of the territorial integrity of Russia. Sometimes I got the impression that we've reversed who is responsible, who is the victim, who's the aggressor. I think we have to understand who the aggressor is, and in future we have to continue to reiterate that and do everything to help Ukraine regain its territorial integrity. And in that context, Europe has done a great deal. If you look at what the member states have done together with the Commission as well, you combine those, the military, humanitarian aid, to date, it is more than the USA has done, just so that we understand that and see it in the right light. I find it regrettable that Mr. Verhofstadt isn't here. It was a slightly populistic attack that he led in calling on the Commission to provide arms, knowing that that is not constitutionally possible according to the treaties of the European Union. Obviously, we want to work together with our member states to try and achieve that end and provide the right support. Secondly, obviously, there's consensus not just here in this House that Russia in the future will have to contribute in reparations, in reconstruction of infrastructure and many other areas of society that will require funding. And the resources from the Russian central bank that have been frozen in foreign banks will be designated to reconstruction and reparation payments, as well as monies that belong to oligarchs. But in legal terms, that is not a simple exercise, and anybody who has been involved in this in any serious extent understands it is not an easy approach. But I think the moral stance is clear and will have to be followed up on. There was also the question as to why we're providing loans, not grants. Well, at the end of the day, that was the possibility we had to help quickly. But I would like to underscore that the European member states have also agreed that in the coming 10 years that the interest on these loans will be covered, will be paid, and the servicing of capital will only have to start as of the 30s. And so we'll see how we're going to deal with that later on. While we're debating here, there are 15 colleagues who are now in Ukraine at this meeting of the Commission with the Ukrainian government. Those are colleagues there who, given their portfolios and responsibilities, have topics that need to be addressed that are current and topical in Ukraine, where they can help. But also, when it comes to the accession prospects for Ukraine, they can support them in those endeavours. Those are two tracks that we're taking in parallel. And there's been mention made of this already. You can't really give a discount on membership, but we can have active engagement, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we'll do in the future. So thank you very much once again for that strong level of support that I've seen here in the debate here today. To conclude, it's become a tradition, but nevertheless very important words. Slava Ukraini.
Grazie. Ecco, il microfono c'è, grazie.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now, on behalf of the Council, Minister Jonsson. Go ahead.
President, honourable members, Commissioner, thank you for all the interventions. And this exchange shows once again the European Parliament's strong support for Ukraine. The EU-Ukraine summit will bring a message of strong, unwavering support, a way for the EU to say, we stand by your side, and that the future for Ukraine and its citizens lies within the EU. I also listened carefully to all your interventions about accountability and further sanctions, and as I said in my introductory remarks, those responsible must be held accountable. And on sanctions, we stand ready to reinforce more restrictive measures. We will further step up the ongoing diplomatic efforts to support Ukraine in all relevant international fora, calling for the steadfast solidarity with Ukraine and against Russia's war of aggression. We are ready to support Ukraine's initiative for a just peace, and we will continue to stand by Ukraine once peace has returned, to reconstruct and help make the future brighter for the Ukrainian people. We firmly stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Thank you very much, and once again, thank you for your attention.
Grazie a lei, Ministro.
Thank you, Minister. I've received 5 motions for a resolution to wind up the debate. The debate is closed and the vote will take place today. Let us move on to the next item on the agenda. Here we have Council and Commission statements on the situation of the former President of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili. On behalf of the Council, we'll be hearing from Minister Jonsson.
President, honourable members of the European Parliament, allow me at this open this debate on the situation of Mr. Saakashvili